god. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I cannot keep up with Rick and Morty anymore. After semi-falling off and giving us some of the most mid episodes of the entire series, the season 6 premiere came back fully swinging in its most satisfying and lore-heavy episode yet. I was back in. I was fully hooked, and I had no idea where they were gonna go in the next episode. I was sitting there like an idiot thinking, whoa, Rick's final boss? Jerry having respect for once? Redefining the family dynamic? This is definitely going to be the most serialized and lore-heavy season yet. And then episode 2 came, and I was swiftly and immediately humbled. Look, at first glance, this week's Rick and Morty may seem like one of those episodes that was pumped out so they could fill their 100 episode quota, but the ending actually does raise a big question around the relationship between Rick and Morty, of if this episode was, frankly, a huge step back for Morty's development. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about, despite all the stupid Die Hard references. I'm Nemo, and this is the Roundtable's deep dive into Season 6, Episode 2, Rick, A Mort Well Lived.
The world is united because the world is one 14-year-old boy, Morty. But where's it all coming from?
Let's recap the events of this episode, unpack the gravity of this ending, and get to the bottom of whether or not Morty's 5 seasons worth of development is gone for good. This episode is more or less a high concept character study of Morty, and also religion, and society, and cults. There's a lot. After the sacred paradise we know and love as Blitz and Chit gets hijacked by alien terrorists, and subsequently has a brief power outage, Morty, who was already logged into the classic game Roy, ends up having his identity fractured across all of the game's NPCs after the game resets. Now, we all know Roy, it's a simulation of life, so Morty's consciousness was fractured between billions of people, which I can't even wrap my head around. So Rick has to go in and rescue his grandson, assuming the role of Roy the only playable character. And because there's billions of NPCs in the game, things get weird fast. We also get some cool Roy lore, basically some Inception rules. Time passes way differently in the game than it does in real life. 1 second out of the real world is equivalent to a month in the game. Time dilation is back on his bullshit, baby. This is some interstellar logic. I love it. Real sci-fi, not sperm monsters, no incest babies. We're back on track. The NPMs, that stands for non-playable Mortys, keep thinking Rick's message is a religion, which leads to what may be the first time Rick acknowledges he's not a god. Some of them easily accept their reality as a fraction of Morty, while some are just way too committed to their character to let go without a fight. Rick needs every piece of Morty to follow him into space and travel beyond the edges of the game, forcing it to kick them out and reset once more. However, after Marta and Rick meet with the president, who feels very George Bush to me, I don't know why, Marta gets to the root of the issue. Morty is very much still torn up inside when it comes to his feelings towards Rick. It's revealed there's a part of Morty, 92% to be exact, that idolizes Rick and appreciates the lengths his grandpa will go to protect him. But the remaining 8% of Morty believes all of that means nothing when Rick still doesn't treat Morty like a grandson, and instead more like a sidekick or servant. Morty still longs for normal grandpa-grandson activities and the bare minimum of love and affection. There's a part of Morty that believes Rick doesn't want to save him because he cares about his family. Rick wants to save Morty because he feels entitled to his family. I wonder why Rick would feel like that. I don't know. And in a twist, Rick is willing to leave this 8% behind, the percentage of Morty that is defiant against Rick, viewing them as disposable, which of course does not sit right with Marta. The delegates of Morty try to come to an understanding, but instead end up on the brink of war over their existential crisis. Marta believes all of Morty's fragments can come to an understanding and leave the game with Rick if he can fulfill the very simple task of telling Morty that he loves him. This does not pan out, and instead wartime ensues. This is so frustrating to watch because I've literally said I love you to like my DoorDash driver. As time passes, the war rages on with no end in sight. Marta now has a daughter who defects to Rick's side, while Marta's father Larry passes away. A lot of pieces of Morty have died in this game, pieces of himself that are obedient and disobedient towards Rick. Sidebar, it's so funny watching these big dramatic scenes because they're still all voiced by Roiland, but not in his typical, I'm gonna voice a lot of the characters and do like slightly different versions of my voice, you know, the classic Roiland style. No, this is just all Morty's voice, and I don't know why, it's just funny to me. This is probably his dream episode. Anyways, in Larry's final moments, he disapproves of Marta's plan to stay in the game, pushing Marta to wave the white flag and sign off on all NPMs to leave the game with Roik. Roy. Yeah, that has a good sound to it. Every Morty that was against leaving the game at that point was just following Marta's lead, but she feels like she's a relic. Marta no longer represents them, so she's setting them free. The fragments all fly off into space as Rick and Morty re-enter the real world and help Summer finish off her Die Hard. Oh yeah, there was an entire B-plot where Summer had to do a Die Hard and kill the terrorist, but she's never seen it, and the boss, voiced by Peter Dinklage, who does an incredible job, has modeled his entire life off of Die Hard. It was kind of one note and probably done to make the writer's room laugh more than anyone else. Oh, that reminds me, this episode was written by a Season 2 veteran, Alex Rubens, who wrote Big Trouble in Little Sanchez. The episode did feel a little classic in its high conceptness, like earlier seasons, so it's not only nice to see an older writer return, but to retain the strong sci-fi with the spin premise that the show was so famous for. Even having a movie reference, which is weirdly how Rick and Morty got its start. Literally every episode was like a film parody. Anyways, the family's adventure may be wrapped up, but the episode ends with some pretty major information. All but one fragment made it out of the game, with Marta staying behind to live a full life as Rick paid off the arcade to keep the machine in storage while an external battery keeps it running. This effectively means that the one piece of Morty that defied and rebelled against Rick is no longer a part of him, but instead has been separated and preserved, but only to Rick's knowledge. Boy, this potentially opens a whole can of worms that may have ultimately reset Morty's character. But before we dig into that, let's focus on what we learned about Morty and where his head currently is. Look, it's clear through a lot of the interactions in this episode that Morty still has a lot of self-esteem issues to work on. Marta's dad apologizes for degrading her haircut and calling her a, play the clip.
Called you a slutty jobless hobo?
Marta's haircut is obviously just Morty's haircut, meaning he thinks his own hairstyle is shitty and overall thinks poorly of his own self-image. And I mean, Morty, I won't cap. You can grow your hair out a little, okay? You're allowed to change your style. Get some tattoos, king. But don't be afraid to love yourself and remind yourself of what you've got. No one could pull as many out-of-league women as you do, bro. Literally women, by the way. I don't know how they got away with that episode, but it's Adult Swim. This bit also implies that Morty believes he has nothing going for him when he's not going on adventures and saving the world. We've seen through the series that Rick has taken away Morty's chance at a normal high school life, as Morty really doesn't have any friends, doesn't have any extracurriculars, or do anything for his own mental health outside of video games and beating off. Sadly, the ending of the episode doesn't inspire confidence for any of this changing in the future. He thinks some parts of himself are more valuable than others.
We're all part of Morty. Some of us more important parts than others.
This is a direct effect of his time spent with Rick. Rick has hammered in the idea on multiple occasions that although Morty's valuable, it doesn't mean his ideas, interests, or desires are worth anything. If it can't service Rick in a way that he finds meaningful, it's pretty much pointless. Which kind of came together in the fact that he was willing to leave it behind in order to get any part of Morty outside of the Roy simulation.
It's not your finest 8%, Morty. 8% of the Snyder Cut was Batman dreaming.
I don't know what that reference is.
Morty still doubts himself even when it comes to one-liners, which is evident when Roy Rick says he's jinxed Summer, leading to Marta overthinking to a soldier fragment. Morty still isn't completely confident in his decision-making, even when he's literally leading the entire world as a fragmented version of himself. Rick has caused Morty to develop a ton of self-deprecating habits. This is best reflected through Marta's interaction with her father Larry, which despite being a part of Morty, acts a lot like Rick, especially with the constant berating and use of sarcastic remarks to constantly tear down, sprinkling in positive affirmations only when she does either what he wants her to do, or when she gains notoriety and admiration from others. Sound a little familiar? Yeah. But what the episode ultimately tells us about Morty is that he still longs for a genuine relationship with his grandfather. He doesn't just want to be taken seriously as an equal, a partner in crime, which Season 5's two-part finale communicated. He wants affection, simple gestures, the occasional I love you, which, again, I swear to God I have given to the Taco Bell night shift employee before. But Rick is just too guarded of a person to let that happen. The death of his Diane and Beth, and his inability to avenge them, has plagued his mind for so long that although he clearly wants to be around his family again and is attached to this specific version of them, he doesn't know how to express simple emotions. Whenever Rick does show any kind of affection, it's through weird sci-fi grand gestures, and that's what love is in his mind. I mean, after all, avenging his wife and daughter at this point is the grandest gesture of them all. Though little things, no matter how important they may be, simultaneously mean nothing and everything to Rick. because of what he's lost. The little things may mean he's comfortable, and he just can't allow that. Because if he's comfortable and acknowledges his attachments, it's going to hurt all the more if and when somebody in the family gets seriously injured or straight up killed. Rick can already never be the same again, that after everything he's been through with Morty, he still can't bring himself to be sincere with his love. Part of the reason he so desperately craves control is so he can avoid having to do that again. Rick's a tragic character, bro. I know they tell us like every 10 episodes, but sheesh, it hurts every time we're exposed to it up close. So with all of that being said, let's get to the biggest question of the episode. Did they just reset Morty's character back to square one? Keep in mind, this season is clearly acting as a pseudo season 1 of sorts. Portal travel has to be fixed, we got a new ship, the family's living in a brand new dimension. I guess to complete this status quo would only make sense to backtrack a bit when it comes to Morty's spine, by Marta sending all the Morty fragments off and conceding to Rick, but staying behind in the game, and even being kept alive by Rick. Every part of Morty that he retains is seemingly now obedient towards Rick. And look, if this is true, I'm gonna be honest, this is a big shame, because so much of Morty's development up to this point revolved around him breaking free of Rick's control and standing up to his grandfather despite all odds. Again, wanting to be taken seriously as an equal without Rick holding back on any secrets and instead communicating like a normal human being. Yet at the end of the episode, Morty completely folded after being put down by the part of himself that was developed through his time with Rick, and once again, sadly, settling for the bare minimum from his grandpa. After their near-death experience with evil Morty, and Morty talking Rick out of playing into Rick Prime's trap, it's disheartening to see this unfold, to say the least. But I won't lie and admit that it's a little nuanced. As the ending shows the bad and good in Rick, yes, he was okay with removing the part of Morty that had enough gold to stand against him, but instead of wiping that part of Morty out entirely, he instead decides to keep her alive, which I think is a layered decision. This shows that Rick did get attached to Marta during the game, and did what he could to give her a happy ending. Because he recognizes her as a part of his grandson, he loves her, even opening up and saying that he had some time to reflect, which is something Rick barely ever does. On another level, I think this could tie into everything that's going on with Rick Prime. There are some pretty heavy implications that Rick Prime is looking for Morty. Morty did vocalize his concerns that Rick may be keeping him around to lure out Prime. But what if that's the opposite? What if Rick wanted to protect Morty and he feels like the best way to do that is to wipe all of the work Morty has done on himself and reduce him to his submissive, coward-like former self? I mean, this episode did pick up in the middle of everything. We never saw how this happened. Anything is possible at this point. If Rick can make sure Morty falls in line and doesn't defy his orders, he can make sure in his fucked up Rick way that Morty stays safe. Alternatively, he may be afraid that Morty might end up following Prime and abandoning him for reasons that aren't clear yet, so screwing over Morty's development may keep Morty from straying over to the dark side. But let's not pretend that either way, Rick is getting to have his cake and eat it too by maintaining his emotional unavailability, but still getting his grandson to obey his every order without any pushback. Considering the show brings back story elements at random, I do think that Marta will return and fully restore Morty's sense of self down the road. Maybe when Rick's plan backfires and he needs to get Morty's defiance back in order to save the day. Look, there was that end scene for a reason. It's not going away, and this is not the last time we've seen Marta or Roy, especially because Roy is like such an iconic in-joke in the series. There's no way they're not going to return to it at least once. I just hope this wasn't some stupid, convenient way to double back on Morty's entire character development so they can do more episodic, seemingly simple adventures where Morty goes back to being like, I don't know, Rick, because it's easier to write, which I want to make very clear I do not think is what happened. After the season 6 premiere, I give the show a lot more credit than I did before, but from an episodic, we have so many episodes, they can air in any order standpoint, it does feel like they opted to have Morty's sense of defiance and individuality stuck in Roy, so he doesn't have a reason to be on a semi-same level as Rick, something I felt he genuinely was at this point, especially after the season 6 premiere. And I don't know if I like it. Just, I guess we'll have to keep watching, like the sheeple we are. But this is where I turn the conversation over to you guys. How do you feel about this episode and its developments? Let us know in those comments below and keep the conversation going by giving us a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Roundtable Vids and me on Twitter at @ItsRetroNemo. And make sure to subscribe to the Roundtable, hit that notification bell, check out the links in the description below, including Toon Drip if you want some sick animation-inspired clothing. Guys, I'm Nemo, this is a Cartoon Breakdown, and I'll see you next time. Peace.